Okay, quick music disclaimer here. I do not own the rights to this music, which belongs to the rightful owner, who is the intoxicating mind of Dr. Frankenstein. So he made my intro and my outro, and I hope you guys enjoy. Check them out on Spotify and YouTube, and no copyright infringement is intended. Have a good day.
For anyone unfamiliar with McElroy's story, he terrorized the town of Skidmore from when he was a teenager in the early 50s, and as the years passed, the crimes he was accused of committing only grew in number and severity, those including assault, theft, statutory rape, and more. McElroy's crimes were the first of a string of other major crimes committed in Skidmore.
There's other incidents similar to this out in the country, but reoccurring events like this in Skidmore is going to keep these things alive, and it's unfortunate.
A clear choice of good versus evil, of right versus wrong.
Twisted Tales.
Hey, I'm Jen.
And I'm Sam.
And
we're
Death Before
Booze.
Booze. Our favorite thing to do is to tell each other outrageous stories and to see how the other one is going to react.
I think we probably aren't the only ones who want to hear crazy stuff, so we started a podcast.
Yup. We're two friends who love all things true crime, paranormal, weird, and just plain sinister.
If any of that sounds like it's up your alley, every Tuesday, come on and join us for news stories, chats, and mostly laughs.
And you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, and Amazon.
Grab a friend, grab your booze, and join us.
Yep. And always stay spooky.
Due to some violent content, parental discretion is advised.
Alright, welcome back to Twisted Tales, folks. So, I guess we'll continue on with their Ken Rex McElroy. And this will be the final part, so this will be part 3. And it's all completed. So our last episode, I believe we left off with the sheriff feeling kind of down because he couldn't get McElroy behind bars. He was like walking around, waving a gun around, all that shit, right? And nobody was stopping him. So Sheriff Dunbar actually handed in his badge that morning there, and he resigned as the sheriff of Skidmore, and he walked out. So this had left the whole town wondering what was going to happen with like Ken's next case, all that shit. So the whole purpose of that preliminary hearing that I was talking about, this was to find out whether a crime had been committed and whether there was reasonable grounds to believe that Ken was the one who had committed it. So now all Ken's lawyer had to do was just mess with Mr. Bowenkamp here. So he was trying to get his client off with anything that he could think of. So upon hearing everything that McFadden had to say, the judge ordered McElroy bound over for trial. So then this continued on with the bond, and then it set a court date for September the 5th. So obviously there's a little bit of leeway and whatnot, right? And Ken was to have zero contact with the Bowenkamp couple. And then he just totally disregarded this. He didn't give a shit, right? He's like, thanks for letting me out of fucking court and all this, right? So some time went by and McElroy disregarded everything here. He started scoping out the Stratton's house once again. And this was mostly when Stratton's wife was alone. Now she would notice a man in a pickup a little ways down from the house here. Seemed like he was watching her for like hours. Stratton knew who this guy was, right? Like, he didn't tell his wife that or anything. He just advised her to grab a license plate. You know, if you see him around, grab the license plate. Let me know next time, and then we'll figure it out. So she started describing the man. And Stratton already knew, right? He needed no description of Kent McElroy, right? The guy was a big burly fuck. So the following week, McElroy just came back. This time, she ended up getting his plate number. So she ended up giving it to her husband. And just for shits and giggles, he ran the plate a few days later, and he came up with a few pictures of McElroy. he took them home and he asked his wife if she knew the guy in the pictures, and she automatically said Ken Rex McElroy. Now, his Buick had came back about a week later, I'd say. So she watched him out there. He had a Budweiser on the dash, shotgun across his lap, and he just fucking do this all day long. The next day, same thing. So what he would do is just try to intimidate witnesses by fucking waving his gun around, sitting out in front of the houses and stuff like that. Just big old scare tactic type thing, right? And the whole thing here was like, even if Mrs. Stratton complained, it was just her word against his, right? He could just fucking park down there. He wasn't doing nothing. Cops couldn't do anything. There's fuck all they could do about it. Now, September 13th rolled around. Trina and Ken were on the move. They were loading up some hounds in a bunch of these kennels here that they put in the back of the truck, because they were heading off to do something here. They ended up grabbing some lunch at this fucking dinky-ass diner here. Trina was backing out, and then an old Dodge cruised by and had swerved just to avoid them, right? So she blew by. The driver yelled, "You asshole," flipped him off, right? They weren't gonna fucking let this slide. So Trina decided to follow him, right? Because nobody fucking calls them assholes, eh? So they stopped about 4 or 5 blocks away. Ken hopped out, all big and burly. He headed for the mail that was in the passenger seat. Trina walked up to the driver, and there was a female that was driving. So the man got out. Ken headed back for his shotgun, headed back to the car, and by now, the cops had pulled up. It was Officer Rostock. He pulled out his .357 Magnum, aimed it at Ken, right between his forehead. Ken didn't go for the shotgun. He yelled, "Kenny, you're under arrest. You touch that gun, I'll blow your fucking head off." So the cop reached in, he grabbed McElroy's gun. Ken was cuffed, and he was put into the cop car. So they spoke to the couple that he had threatened with a gun. And in the end, the cops doubted that anything would even be followed through on these charges if they fucking put them through. Now McElroy told police, "You better look after my dogs." He gave them specific instructions, mind you, on how to actually look after and take care of them. So more charges were slapped on for Ken here for exhibiting a deadly weapon and such. And if he was convicted, he would face 5 years in the slammer. Dun dun dun. Not long after the hearing, Ken was going to get in shit for pointing his gun and threatening his couple. So the couple actually testified that they weren't scared of McElroy that day. He didn't intimidate them, and that he didn't approach the vehicle in an angry manner. The woman testified that she hadn't seen McElroy point his gun around, and that he held it with his barrel pointing down. But when the cops got there, it's not what they seen shake down, right? And you could see now she was just totally bullshitting, right? But when the sheriff got on the stand, he talked to the judge and everything. He's like, "Here, this is how it went down." He gave his testimony, and the judge ordered a new trial for December 12th of 1980. So, I mean, anytime this guy gets in shit, he's just like, "All right, well, we'll reschedule for this date," or, "this person's not saying this." Fuck, they just got to figure out everything. So it was later found out that Ken actually talked to the couple prior to the court date. So he threatened to actually burn their fucking house down if they testified against him. Obviously, the couple were scared shitless, and that's what they did. And by now, I mean, this was just pissing off the town folk. I mean, Ken would just bomb around town, he'd get drunk, he'd make his threats, and he'd even fucking threaten the ones that were testifying against him. Now, it all got to a point where he would go to the bar, and all the other barflies would just clear right out. It was just him and the bartender. Trina or whoever he had with him at the time. And in the meantime, Lois Bowenkamp had started writing to every official that she could think of regarding this prick. Now, her state representative actually wrote her back. This was the Missouri Department of Public Safety. This was a dude named F.M. Wilson. So he said he knew about crimes that had went back from like the 1950s about Kent, but had never been convicted. And there was no assistance offered to her from him at all. Now, a few other people wrote back and everything. They were like, oh man, it's not our problem, it's a problem for state law enforcement and all that shit. Others were like, we don't have any jurisdiction here, we can't do anything. So everybody was pretty much on their own, right? And nobody wanted to go up against fucking Ken McElroy. And even when cops were like questioning the boys in the whole Bowen camp shooting, that's the ones that McElroy paid to go in and like get a drink just moments before the shooting. Now the first boy, he changed his story because he knew Ken would come after him, right? The second boy, he said he saw nothing out of the ordinary. The third had actually made a written statement here. He said he was present. And then a few days later, he changed his story. So nothing was sticking. Now, weeks later, Ken had more hearings, more court shit. And this would all be like for his current charges here and to see if he was actually keeping the peace. But it was later found out that he violated his bond by having felony charges against him. So they added these two conditions here. That, one, he couldn't carry any firearms on his person or in his vehicle, and that he was banned from leaving the following counties: Nottoway, Atchison, Holt, Leavenworth, and Harrison County. And that was it. He was fucking let go. So besides the whole back and forth shit with the law, McElroy just went back to terrorizing key witnesses. People started like noticing his trucks parked a little bit down from their house, driving around their house, and just back and forth, everywhere they went, right? Like if they went into town for something, they'd see him, right? Like, oh hey, follow me to the grocery store, shit like that. All of this information was actually called into police, but as usual, nothing was done. Now behind the scenes, the lawyer, McFadden, he was looking for like every which way to try to delay these court dates, all these hearings, just to keep his client out of jail for as long as possible. Now McFadden had found a paper that wasn't signed by the judge here for something, so that was it. Now they would have to wait longer because that would have to be signed. And it was just like a initial error, right? This gave McFadden sufficient grounds for a continuance. Now the motion for a continuance was filed on November 24th, and then the court was rescheduled yet again until February 5th of 81. So by now, everybody in Skidmore was just fucking losing faith in the whole system after this. I mean, how could you trust your own police force if they couldn't even put away a guy who was committing crimes? Some of which had been like phoned in, they've been reported, they've actually seen him in progress. And this was just like around Skidmore and other surrounding areas, right? So McElroy just kept it up. He kept fucking with the town of Skidmore. Cheryl Brown, she actually seen him parked one day while she was heading into town. He was over by her place. Now he had a Thompson .45 caliber machine gun just laying out right in plain sight. So when she seen this, it fucking totally shook her up, right? So she continued on, going into the grocery store. She called the sheriff. So he said the gun was legal as long as he had a tax stamp for it. So obviously, it was just always some excuse, right? Like, oh, hey, well, it's this reason why he has this. And, we'll be out there later, things like that. And there was one sheriff that actually started parking his car in the garage in the police station there because he didn't want to be fucking seen. And McElroy just kept fucking with the Strattons. He actually described the inside details of the couple's house at one point here, so yeah, it's pretty creepy. Now, St. Joe police had started watching the Stratton house on occasion too, because when the other officers were busy, they would swing by, just do checkups and stuff. So they'd see him around, mostly when they were gone from the house. So McElroy would just show up when, the man of the house wasn't home, right? It was just Cheryl. I mean, like, sometimes he would just stay there all day. Sometimes he'd just sit there just enough to be noticed. 10 minutes or something would go by and they'd call it in. He'd fuck off. Then the police would come. It's just a whole shit show. So Ken just really enjoyed tormenting all those that could testify against him. And he didn't let up on Dunbar either, even though he resigned. So, everywhere you looked, Ken and his cronies were just driving around the town causing shit. So they would now openly park 4 vehicles that he used for his crimes, park them directly across from the bar. Cops were also notified about this. Guess what they did? Nothing. And Ken just continued to do as he pleased. He would get these charges here. He'd be in and out of court. Charges dropped. Witnesses would testify. They'd drop their testimonies. And after some time went by, one of the locals had seen Ken around. Now, this guy's name was Charlie. He actually grew up on a farm south of the McElroys. Now, he knew Ken from his younger days, from his youth. So the two would hunt coon dogs and trade dogs, shit like that. Now, back in the day, Charlie had his bouts of boozing, fighting, same as Ken, right? But over time, this guy found the grace of God. Now, he was in the area. He stopped by Ken's place of residence, and he tried to just talk to him about the Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So they chatted just a little bit here, right? Ken wanted to continue on the conversation and everything, so they hopped into Ken's car, and they started going over the Bible together. Something that you really wouldn't think, right? But this did happen. Now, when he asked Ken about having a better life with God in it, Ken replied with, "I guess so." But he shook his head and he smiled. He's like, "I guess I'll change one day, but I'm not ready yet." So they sat in the car, they talked about a half hour more about God, salvation, everything else. Ken did actually learn about God throughout his life too. He was no stranger to thy Lord. Because he went to church and everything. He prayed, did all this. But, where was God to save him from all the evil and everything else that he caused? Smite me, O Lord. So these guys parted ways after a handshake and they left. Now, this is probably one of the few times that Ken was actually civil towards somebody throughout this whole fucking tale. So coming up was more court shit. This was the whole Bowen camp situation here. So this was regarding the shooting at the grocery store. And I guess they had some evidence this time here. There was actually a knife that was found at the scene. But police had failed to fucking put this in evidence. Obviously because of that little fuck up. McFadden was just all over these guys. So he was going on about the telling of his depositions and all that. So I'll give you some details on that. Depositions question and answer session. So what happens here is you may be called in to give a deposition in court if you were one of the parties in a case, or if you have a witness testimony, something like that. Deposition is actually done under oath. So anything you can say can be used against you as evidence in a court of law. So McFadden laid into this guy here. He was sick of his bullshit. He wanted to fucking ramp him up a little bit. But Bowenkamp's testimony stayed the exact same as it did, word for word, and nothing changed. So the lawyer just couldn't deter him, right? But things end up getting delayed. There's a fucking shocker. So we'll fast forward to November 24th of 1980. This was a second deposition here. This was going on. Now McFadden had filed a motion asking the trial to be continued on December 3rd. So the courts had changed a few travel restrictions on Ken here. So he now had to wait for the order to be re-motioned and signed by a judge. So this was mailed up to Harrison County, and this actually just sat in limbo for a month. Nobody signed it. This actually took 7 weeks to get signed, and continuance was granted yet again. So the lawyer just kept getting things delayed, right? Every time something went on, he'd just fucking find some loophole. Get Ken off. Giggity. And continuances galore just kept popping up and up. And like I said, like, cops just fucking stayed away from this guy here. They were just like parking their cruisers away from the station there. So that way people wouldn't see a cop parked out there and they'd bother them with all the McElroy stuff, right? So they started parking away from the station and then like walking in and shit like that. Pretty wild. Now, prosecutors had continued on with the case here. They wanted to right the wrongs around the community and whatnot, right? Get this guy locked up. Finally. It's gonna come. It'll happen. That's what everybody thought. But I mean, everybody that seemed to make this happen, they were just brushed aside. Nobody had any faith in the fucking system. Nobody had faith that he would go to jail. And all this guy did was just steal shit within the community. He would threaten like a vast majority of people around the fucking community. And he had relationships with young farm girls, like all the way down to like the age of 12. Ugh. By now, people were just getting annoyed with his antics. I mean, fuck, this guy was raping young girls, and like a lot of these girls that he was doing this to were just naive, young, and he threatened the parents. It's like, I'll blow your fucking head off and take your daughter for the night, kind of thing, right? And they wouldn't stop this guy. That's how fucking crazy this dude was, man. Just a big brick shit house of a man. Nobody wanted to fucking stop. And for those that get bullied, like, all bullies do is try to fucking push people around for their own satisfaction, right? Their own little ways to feel better about themselves, I guess. So back to it here. Now, McElroy was actually showing a gun to Cheryl Brown here. She was at their local grocery store again. So, he wasn't the law-abiding citizen that we all know that he could be. But, he did what he wanted, any given fucking time. Nobody fucking cared now. All they did was just throw some extra patrols up on Stratton's house here, because McElroy was back doing that. He was fucking with Cheryl Brown again. And all he was doing was just throwing his weight around. He continued doing this until his next court date. He just wanted to see if he could sway any of the witnesses and go home. And that's it. Now, this whole upcoming trial, he didn't even want to happen, right? He wanted this fucking done with. Now, McFadden didn't go this way, actually. He didn't get this delayed. This one was actually going forward in full tilt. Now, in court, when Ken showed up, you'd think like this big burly guy, fucking overalls and whatnot, right? Farm type dude. But while he was in court, he looked like your average Joe, man. Just sitting outside the court, you could see him standing close to witnesses and stuff. He'd kind of like stare at them. Now, while in court, he was just dressed in a white dress shirt and slacks. He behaved like a total gentleman. And he knew when to sit down, when to stand up, and he didn't say a word. He let his attorney do his talking. I mean, I'm sure he'd say, like, yes, Your Honor, no, Your Honor, but that's about it. He did deny pointing the shotgun at the couple here that Trina had stopped that day. So the couple from the last court date here that said that he didn't fucking point the gun at them or anything like that, it was all crap. Now, this whole court thing shook down again here because this time, Officer Rostock is actually going to testify here about the couple. Because when he rolled on the scene, he said that he talked to the girl. She said, that son of a bitch pointed a shotgun at me and my ex-husband. He threatened to shoot us. And there were kids in the car. And it wasn't right. And that's all the information that he took with him. I mean, McFadden even grilled this guy too, right? He just tried to make him look like a stupid cop while he was up in the stand. This here was just like your classic distraction tactic, right? Like you put shit on the cop, or like you kind of put the cop on trial. This would take attention off of the defendant and put it on to the officer. Now, the victims had even went back on the stand here, and they denied that Ken had pointed the shotgun at them like they did the previous court date and everything. The couple took the stand, one by one, and all they kept saying was, it was just a misunderstanding. It's just a misunderstanding. But this whole thing didn't really go along with their earlier statement. The judge was pissed off. He tried to impeach the woman due to this. But it didn't get that far, and it didn't make any sense to continue on with the trial here. But neither one was testifying against Ken, so nothing they could do. McFadden actually requested no additional time for taking depositions. He didn't try any tricks. He had the judge deal with an error here on travel restrictions and stuff, and then an old Kenny boy was actually up on the stand here too. Now they asked him about the shotgun and the shells and why he needed them and all that. Ken said that he uses it to catch coons. So this means raccoons, so he would go raccoon hunting. Now the judge asked why someone would hunt coons with a sawn-off shotgun and shells designed to stop a human being. And McElroy was just a little bit vague with this response, right? Like, he knew he didn't need a fucking shotgun to hunt raccoons, right? And even with Ken being short with his responses, all the evidence that they had was just the couple's testimony. And now that changed, it was just out of whack. I mean, they changed this whole thing due to fear. Ken was found not guilty, and he was free to go yet again. His high-priced lawyer had gotten him out of a jam yet again. So this whole court shit just lasted like a day, and he was done with it all. For the time being, mind you. So people were disappointed. Some didn't even care because they didn't get their hopes up. Now, Ken actually wanted his gun and the shells back from the court. I mean, technically, they still were his things. Now, upon receiving the gun, he gifted it to his lawyer, McFadden. And then McFadden actually took it to the country and fired it off. So after trial, a lot of people knew that the two victims, they were scared of Ken. You know, this guy's a fucking maniac, right? And now Ken was just set free, so the man who pulled guns on people could now continue to fucking do so. And because of this, a lot more folk around the region, especially the town, they actually started picking up weapons and arming themselves too. They were just scared shitless. And once Ken was free, he certainly made his freedom known. He would drive by the sheriff's office here, he'd circle a few places. This guy beat his charges. He didn't fucking care. And so all this guy had to do now was just beat the whole Bowenkamp case here and he'd be all honky-dory. Now at this time, Ken had to return to work, but he was waiting for the travel ban to actually be lifted before he could do so. So he couldn't travel too far with this ban on. Now McFadden swore under oath that the client made his living buying and selling livestock. Also, a bit of antiques here too. So he could not be fully employed due to this travel ban. So he wanted to get this thing taken off. And they were removed in January of 1981. So Ken obviously took his newfound freedom. He enjoyed it. And he went up to the Hickory Bar. This is up in St. Joe. So when he was up there, he had a few pops out with his buddy. So him and a buddy got a little liquored up. Ken started rambling on about a new truck that he was going to buy, right? It was almost Christmas time. This guy deserves a present. Let's hope somebody fucking shoves one up his chimney. So the two drunk boys hopped in the truck here, and they headed for the dealership. This was Kraus Motors up in Mound City, Missouri. That's actually permanently closed these days here. And this is like a 40-minute drive from the bar. It's about a 37-mile distance away. Now, Mound City is actually named for the Indian mounds that the original town was built on. And it was actually an important trading and ferry landing back in the day here. This is, I believe it went across the river from Memphis during the 1800s, I believe. So there's some history, folks. So they got there in their 40-minute drive. So once they got to the dealership here, they started looking out at trucks. They hopped out, they would like point at one here, like, oh, that's a cool truck. Oh, look at that one over there, eh? So that's what they did. And then Ken got to a 1981 Chevy Silverado. This truck had it all, especially all the luxuries that a 1980s would have to offer, like fucking cruise control, air conditioning, power windows. I believe it had dual gas tanks. And Ken looked at the sticker. It was going for $10,775. So what McElroy did, he went into the office, he flaunted his cash around. So he asked the dealer to throw in like a nice grill for like next to nothing. But that cost would be an additional $175. So Ken came back on December 23rd with the remaining money. So the salesman went right into his manager's office. He grabbed Ken a bottle of Jack Daniels and a box of chocolates. Since it's Christmas, right? Be merry. So he gave him that, and then he watched Ken drive off. So by now, Christmas time and all, obviously there's snow. It's winter time in Skidmore. So Ken was free. He was showing off his new set of wheels. And I wouldn't say people were like jealous of McElroy's vehicle, right? Like they knew how he got his money. They knew how he did his dirt. Nobody really gave a shit, right? It's winter time. Not a lot of people are going to be sitting around looking at this guy's truck at the middle of winter, right? Blowing snow for fucking weeks on end, right? So the town's a little slower in the wintertime, right? Farming community and all that. I mean, they do what they do. But there wasn't really many people around. I mean, Ken was just the only one driving around. But his harassment had started up again here because the upcoming court case, right? Now, this was even brought up to like Skidmore sheriffs and all that, right? But all they did was fucking sit around. They didn't do anything with it, right? They even messaged the attorney general's office here, and they did jack shit about it. Even when police had time to check shit out, Ken was gone. And this went on for a while too, just like it did for many other people prior, right? So about this time, McElroy was getting really nervous about Bone Camp and the upcoming trial date. So he started asking around for some copper-headed snakes. And he was going to pay a lot of fucking money for these. Well, about $50 a snake, roughly, right? So not too much. Now, his plan was to put them in the Bone Camp's vehicle. Let the snakes crawl around. When he hopped in, they would bite the shit out of him. But didn't go on like this. He ended up not getting the snakes. Now, another night, while he was at the bar, Ken had dropped a huge bag of money right on the counter. Just like fucking Scrooge McDuck. So he looked around here, looked at everybody's faces, and there was about $2,000 to $3,000 there. Quite the generous pile. So he speaks up. He goes, "Who wants some money? I'll give it to you. But you gotta do something for me." So Ken nodded on over in Trina's direction, gave a quick nod, and she came over and had a corn knife in her hands. So all Ken said was, "All you gotta do, take this corn knife, go up to the store, and run through the old man. And then you can have all this fucking money." Now, Ken said you gotta make sure you make it look like an accident. Just kind of carry it in, stumble around, and then accidentally stab him. So a few folks were like, "Nah, man, we don't want to do this shit." It kind of pissed him off. And then he angrily said, "He's the only goddamn witness against me, and I ain't going to jail. It's going to be done right this time." But nobody gave a fuck about what he had to say anyway, so nothing came from it. Ken was all just fucking talk, just a big blowhard. Now, after winter, spring had started up, and the town got a little bit busier here now because folks were getting ready for their farming and all that shit. Ken was a little bit older now. He's about 47 at this time here, so not the young whippersnapper he once was. He had a little bit more weight on him now, and he was drinking a lot more. He actually grew a little bit pissed off and moody and whatnot, right? He was sore. You get old, you get sore, right? By now, any establishment that he would go to had started closing a little bit earlier. Customers would actually leave when he showed up. So like if he came to the bar, people would just chug their beer and they'd dip out. They didn't want to hear his bullshit. Kids were home a little bit earlier now. They'd go home by like supper time and all that, and the streets were just completely bare, completely empty. Now one guy had ended up closing his store for good because nobody was coming in anymore. Everybody was just staying home and they wanted to avoid Ken McElroy like the fucking plague. All of Skidmore was just like one big graveyard, man. Police were the only ones that were around, and Ken and his little convoy or whatnot. So they would drive around and try to find Ken, see if he was up to no good and shit, right? You see some farmers in their fields and shit like that, but I mean, that was about it. A lot of people were just working, trying to get their crops ready. And by the time that 1981 had hit, Ken's house was just fucking rode off by this point, too. He didn't give a shit now. His dogs were unchained. They were running around, biting people and shit. And Ken was going pretty hard on the booze here. I mean, he would go on like 2 or 3 day binges, drinking bottles of whiskey like they were glasses of water. Yeah, been there, done that. But those weren't the good times, right? Ken was seriously overweight by now. He had a huge gut on him that actually protruded over his belt. What are you looking at me gut for? He got completely hammered now, just shit-faced. He'd go into town. He'd just bitch at anybody that fucking got in his way. Now, he seen one of his buddies here at one point when Ken was drunk. Ken had rolled into his buddy Tom. So they got to driving and drinking and whatnot. They were just back roading and shit. So they were just passing the bottle back and forth, having some swigs. And then Ken had reached for his shotgun. He rambled on about fucking Bowen camp here, and he was getting angrier every swig he took, right? He's like, that motherfucker, blah, blah, blah. You know, just driving, doing whatever, pissed off at the world. As much as Ken can be pissed off, I guess. So by this time, Ken didn't really have much going on in his life. I mean, the whole place hated him. He rolled with the same dirtbags almost daily. And age was fucking catching up to this guy, right? You drink heavy, all that stuff. I mean, it's not going to be good for you in the long run. By the month of May, there was a big annual dog meet. So Ken would actually go to these every year, right? It was something he fucking loved to do. He'd see all his old buddies and stuff. So this would bring many hunters from all around. Now, this was held up in Gallatin, Missouri. Hope I said that right. Now, this is about 25 miles south of Bethany and about 50 miles east of St. Joe. It was here where the big social event for like dog trading and dog betting and storytelling was going on. And this is where Ken was actually most happiest. Now, the meet was held at a park, just a little outside of town, right? They didn't bother anybody, but there was all kinds of pickup trucks there, new, old. People were showing their shit off, their dogs. Some had like really nice kennels, and then others had like makeshift pieces of shit looking ones, right? Just all fucking hammered up with nails, chicken wire. And the kennels were just filled with dogs. Some of them were well trained, others not so much. So some dogs were tied to trees. Some were sleeping, and others were running around exciting, marking their territory, sniffing stuff. And they were just happy to see other dogs. Well, most dogs, right? Some dogs don't get along. Now, there was a bunch of like races too. They called these dog water races. Now, these were fun. There were about 4 dogs in a couple kennels down by the lake. So above them would be like a raccoon in a cage. And this would be pulled over across the lake on a pulley system. So the cages would open, the dogs would run across. First one to reach the far side would win one category, and then the first dog to like strike a tree where a raccoon had sat would win another category, and so on, right? So it was based off like speed, agility, and scent and whatnot, right? To see if they could pick up anything. Now the big hunt was actually saved for that evening. And this year, old Kenny boy, he decided to sit this one out. Now, he stood around here, he watched and everything, he had a good time. Now, another guy had ended up running Ken's dogs around. But, I mean, Ken was just really slow. He was getting hard to move. He was fucking fat. And it was just really hard to keep up. So once the whole thing actually came to an end, Ken just packed up his stuff, his dogs, and he left for home. Said goodbye to a couple people, right? But not like before where he'd actually stay around and, close out the whole thing, right? Pretty much be the last guy leaving. Now, one day, Ken actually drove on down to his old friend Ray Ellis's place. Now, Ray lived up in Gilman City. This is over around the southeastern Harrison part here. Not a huge spot or anything. Southeastern Harrison was a place to go, I guess. Now, these guys had known each other from trading dogs and stuff, right? Now, McElroy gave this guy like a shit story about how Bowenkamp was the one to engage with him first, and that Ken had tried to stab him with a knife as self-defense. You know, what do you do, right? So while he was talking about the court and Bowenkamp and stuff, Ken just reached in and he pulled out a jurors list. So, Buddy knew where this was going. So McElroy asked Ray if he could see about hanging the jury for him, and he would pay him a cool $1,000, no questions asked. Now Ray's like, yeah, man, I'll look into that shit. I'll get back to you. And as this meeting was going on, there was a couple kids that were in Skidmore. They had went over to Stratton's house, and they mentioned that Ken had offered them some money to give him some snakes. So they agreed to do this, right? They're kids. They're like, fuck yeah, $50. Hell yeah. Especially in the 80s, right? Like you could fucking live like a king off $50. Go get some candy. Good times. But as soon as McElroy had mentioned that he was going to put the snakes into the jurors' mailboxes, the kids shut him down. They quickly declined to do so after hearing him say that. Kind of pissed Ken off, but I mean, they're kids, right? You can't fucking do anything. And now, it was just 2 days before the big trial. And by this time, the lawyers, all the other officials and all that were actually getting their stuff together. And everything was a go for June 25th. And when this whole thing started up, everybody would figure out what happened between McElroy and Bowenkamp. So it would be here where they tried to decipher whether the old man had held the knife and caused Ken to fear for his life, or Bowenkamp had claimed to be in the store, then came back out, and then there was Ken with a fucking shotgun over by the loaded docks. So this means that they had to determine where everyone was standing. So they did this by a diagram. Now they were going to check out police testimony, damage done to the ceiling tile from the gunfire, all of that fun stuff, right? So McElroy's case had rested on the self-defense, and Ken would actually have to explain why he had been scared enough to shoot an old man. They talked to the boys there that McElroy paid to go get sodas, and Bo himself even hopped up into the seat here, and he told his account very straightforward and to the point. Officer Stratton also testified here. He was talking about the arrest and who was present and all that. So this time around, there was a witness for the defense. Now her name was Selena O'Connor. So she testified that she had seen Bo come after Ken McElroy with a knife, and she was just fucking terrified. She actually hopped in her truck and drove away. She was actually cross-examined, and if the jury had believed anything that she said, or even what McElroy said, the whole case would probably just be acquitted. And her story didn't really make a lot of sense, right? Like, they had a few questions that had come up, like, where was she at before this trial? Why did she leave Bowenkamp to die? Etc., etc. I mean, many valid key points, I guess. You gotta ask questions. You gotta get answers. All this evidence and testimony shit was looked at, and by 5 p.m. that day, the presentation of the evidence had been completed. So later on that day, lawyers and the judge's last name was Donaldson. So he was going over a few things with everybody. So what they did here was charge McElroy with the lesser offense of second-degree assault. So with all the evidence in place, meaning like the blood stains, the bullet, the holes in the ceiling, the positioning of both men, all of this shit contradicted McElroy's story. Because things now played out on Bowenkamp's side, right? Nothing they could really do. It had to match because this was his side of the story, and all the evidence that they took and all the fucking things they could figure out all led to McElroy being a dick. So they left the right decision up to the jury here. Like, they said, you decide who to believe. And Selena was also grilled while she was on the stand here, and she was found not to be believed. McElroy's lawyer, McFadden, he stood up and he made an appeal to the jury that his poor client didn't deserve to go to jail for simply defending himself. You know, just laying it on thick like molasses, right? Really spreading that shit around. Police evidence had shown that Bo was actually 10 feet away from McElroy at the time he was shot. So when the jury went to deliberate, McElroy gathered in the hallway with his girls. He gave Trina's purse a little pat here, you know, like that. And he said, if this goes bad for me, you know what to do. Do it just like I told you, and everything will be okay. By this time, right, things are already going bad for him anyway. So on the way back up, old Buzzard Beak was rambling on about not spending one night in jail. Like, I'm not going to spend a night in jail. I'm fucking Ken McElroy. Attaboy, buddy. You're a fucking scholar. Now, Ken's buddy Ray Ellis, that he talked to about, fucking around with the jury, he dipped out. He didn't come through with anything on his word either. Although the guy was on the jury, Ellis didn't mention one thing to him. Now, the situation just wasn't looking good for Ken this time around. But all in all, Ken Rex McElroy was slapped with a second-degree assault charge and a 2-year sentence. He showed no reaction upon hearing this. McFadden wasn't overly pleased, but he got him down from life imprisonment to fucking 2 years. And that's actually with good behavior, right? Now, he'd served like 8 months or so with all that good behavior. And in the meantime, Ken would appeal. And this would actually cost him a nice little amount. This was somewhere between the $20,000 mark. So he was found guilty, and he was still allowed to roam the streets of fucking Skidmore. Lawyers and their loopholes, I guess, right? But he wasn't out of the water just yet. And with him roaming free, a lot of the farmers began to take up arms. So they were buying their own weapons now, learning how to shoot them. They brought weapons with them in their trucks, and they were prepared for any and all fuckery. Now, Trina said that Ken became like super paranoid that the town was going to get rid of him. And she also had a bad feeling about stuff too. Now, the son of a neighboring farm actually had come over to Ken's farm at one point here, spoke to Trina, and he told her that some men were going to pay him some money to kill Ken. And Trina actually saw a shotgun and a gun in this guy's truck when he rolled up to beak off or whatever, right? So she later on told Ken about this guy's visit. A little later on that night, that same guy came back with his truck, lights turned off. And this time, old Kenny boy had been waiting for him. So he told him to get the fuck off the property and never come back. But he never did. He dipped right out. Now, a few days after the trial, Ken and Trina were at the D&G Tavern, sitting down having a beer, and a farmer that they knew sat down beside them there, and he was going on that the townsfolk were petitioning to have Ken banned from Skidmore entirely, and everybody in that town was going to sign it. So Trina and Ken got to talking here, and they were bullshitting here about one time that Sheriff Estes had pulled him over and told Ken that they were going to catch him one day out on the gravel road, and they were going to shoot him and say that he resisted arrest. So yeah, people were making threats, but so was Ken. Ken was just threatening the whole town. People were pissed off. They're not going to deal with this shit much longer. Another time, Ken and Trina were actually driving home, and they stopped at a stop sign. So there were a few people hanging around now. One of them had looked Ken directly in the eyes and said, "We don't want you in town anymore." Ken just looked at him, kept on driving. But by now, Ken was just stressed the fuck out anyway. He felt that his sense of power, like his sense of grip, was kind of slipping away. Sliding down the shit rope. And Trina noticed, Ken was starting to become different here. It seemed that the fight was no longer inside of Ken, right? And sometimes while laying in bed, Ken would ask Trina, what would she do when he was gone? These people will let you stay. And when that happens, Ken said, I want you to take the girls and get the hell out of Skidmore. Ken also talked about like where he wanted to be buried and stuff, like what clothes he wanted to be buried in. Like it was kind of getting a little bit weird, like because Ken never fucking talked like this. Now Trina asked him why he kept going into town if he knew there was going to be trouble. I have to do something to get back at them, he said. And Ken had even told a friend that I don't give a shit no more. I don't care if I fucking live or die. I just don't care. Now fast forward to June 30th of 1981. So this is like 4 days after this whole conviction shit. Ken had taken a drive down to Skidmore, and Trina was following in the green Chevy. So they had with them an Army M1 rifle. And this was just in the back seat. So they rolled up to the bar. There were a couple of men there. So Ken walked in with it, and some dude goes, "You're an old war man, are ya?" And, this dude was just fucking ribbing him, I guess. And there were a couple people here now at the bar. I mean, there was a guy named Pete. He had 2 sons there, Kenley and Wesley. So they've been over there at the bar. Ken said, I've got a gun that I want you guys to look at. And so Trina went to the car. She retrieved it, and they brought it inside the bar. Perfect idea, right? So she passed it to Ken. He waves it around, holding it, like it's a big fucking awesome thing. They got this big honking aura coming from it. Yeah, just like that. So, anyway, he was showing everybody around and, check this gun out. He pulled out a 5-round clip from his pocket. Popped her in. So he loaded this fucker up with a bullet, put one right in the chamber, and began telling everybody what he was going to do with it and how he was going to shoot Bowen Camp. Just drunk, swinging the gun back and forth, stabbing the air with his bayonet like, we're going to get this fucker. But whatever. By this point, the regulars of the tavern, they were like, yeah, whatever, and they dipped out because of his fucking antics. Now, one member of the bar here said, the hell you will, upon leaving. It's like, you're not going to do shit, son. Now, some of them left without even saying a word, right? And one of those men was Pete Ward. He was just pissed off at Ken's bullshit. He had just walked right out without saying a word. Everybody was just choked. They didn't have their town, right? Like, it was practically owned by this fuckhead. He's just drunk. And Pete just kept on walking here. And he was thinking to himself, the time had come to do something about Ken. And the people actually needed some help. So he started walking west. This was a little bit up around the hill there. Up towards the 4 corners around the bank. He headed over to his home, came back towards the patio, and he was holding a high-powered rifle. He started walking the way that he came, and he stopped right in front of the gas station. This was owned by a fucker named Bert Johnson. So what he was going to do here was, if Ken decided to come up this way at Bowen Camp, this guy had his high-powered rifle, he could either tell him to get lost or, shoot and kill him. They didn't want this shit going on anymore. The threats and everything were just getting old by this point. This guy was actually willing to blow him away to fucking keep this guy safe. I mean, it's more than what most were doing, right? Especially the police. Now, by now, there were a bunch of, older women and men buying guns, shooting them off there on their property and stuff, shooting their cans. My precious antique cans. But they were only doing this because they feared Ken. And most of them didn't even meet this guy. That's the kind of fucking sway this dude had. And whether McElroy had sensed Pete like at the corner that night, or maybe like he sensed something was off, some kind of danger or something. When he left the bar, he drove in the opposite direction of where Pete was. Now the truck Trina was in had shortly followed Ken in the direction that he went, obviously. So they didn't go up that way at all. They was just talking shit. Ken was just a big fucking blowhard. So over the next couple of days here, Pete had become something of a hero because the town folk had seen his actions. Some people, heard about it a couple days later and stuff like that, and they also told a few others. Now, Petey Boy, he was a World War II vet, a local boy, and a great farmer from Skidmore. This guy was old war veteran. Now, for some of the community members here, this had brought hope that maybe running and hiding was going to be over with now. Nobody had to, bow down to McElroy. And even though Pete had done this act, it wasn't the way that he initially wanted to deal with the situation. Pete ended up calling the sheriffs to see what they could do with Ken. I mean, hence, he had weapons in his possession all the time. He was threatening lives. So what he wanted to do was get some affidavits and revoke McElroy's bond. But with doing this, it didn't mean that Ken would end up going to jail. I mean, even if a bunch of people signed it and whatnot, right? Like, Pete signed it, his son signed it, and he said, I'm doing this. This is what needs to happen. So, by doing this, they hoped that others would follow and get signatures, and then McElroy, his bond would be revoked, and they would put him in jail. Well, this is what they hoped. So, I'll tell you a little bit about Pete. Now, Pete was a retired farmer. He lived with his wife, Helen. And they had this, two-story home. This is located on the corner road, a block west from the town's service station. So obviously it didn't take long for McElroy to hear about this petition, right? So he found Pete. And he said, Hey, Pete, did you sign this petition against me? Yeah, Pete said. Well, what other names are on that list there? Because he wanted to see the signatures. So Pete refused to tell him. This left Ken just pissed off, so he ended up leaving. So he got down by the gas station, then he turned the corner, and he stopped. So Trina and Ken had switched spots. So Trina was now behind the wheel, and Ken was on the passenger side, with a gun in his hand. So some dude had actually seen them stop, and then Ken hopped out with a gun, slowly walked up the alley, just as Trina had drove off the other way, kind of like Ken was sneaking up to shoot him. This wasn't until town folk had seen Ken sneaking up, and they yelled at Pete. They were like, McElroy's coming up for you. So there was no point now. The whole surprise attack went to shit. So Ken ended up getting picked up, and the two had driven away. And within hours, the whole standoff between the two was the talk of the town. Now, the very next day, Pete's wife, Helen, she was out in her yard doing, yard work and stuff. She seen Ken scoping out a residence there, so he was parked nearby. So Ken got out, and he walked on by, saying loudly, so she'd hear him, I might have to burn this fucking house down someday. So, this info had gotten back to the town folk, and they all began to show up at the tavern, get drunk, and kind of conspire against McElroy and talk about ways to get rid of him once and for all. But, mostly this was just drunk fucking talk, right? Drunk bar shit. Now, later, they had tried to get a petition filled out to just ban him and all that. But, they got a few signatures, but it wasn't enough to get the plan put in action. Now, someone on the board had told them that this way was illegal, so they had dropped the petitioning altogether. So by this time, Ken's lawyer, McFadden, had mailed a letter to Judge Donaldson requesting that there be a postponement on the upcoming July 10th hearing. They wanted to schedule it for July 20th instead. So the judge took that into consideration and he approved it. This was mostly because both men knew how pissed off the residents of Skidmore were. They kind of figured something was brewing at this time. The lawyer even called Ken, telling him to steer clear of Skidmore. And Ken just replied, "Nobody can keep me out of anywhere. I go where I want, when I want. I'm not afraid of anyone." Ken's lawyer just told him straight up, like, "Man, if you gotta head into town, give me a call before you go. Like, give me a call first type deal, right?" And then they hung up the phone. Ken didn't give a shit now. He just wanted to be the one to start shit first, right? He knew something was happening. Something was in the works. Really? Now, back in the town of Skidmore, the townfolk plotted and schemed. They just wanted to figure out just how to fucking get rid of McElroy and have it not be a crime, have it not come back on them. They wanted to kind of just do this in the way of self-defense. So, Friday, July 10th, 1981, farmers were up early getting their shit ready for the fields. You know, a few other town members were kicking around. They got called to a town meeting so everybody could finally get together and chime in on what to do about Ken McElroy. So, few people got worried about the continuance and all that here, so I mean, that kind of razzed people up. They were just going to see what could be done. And now, like, honestly, like, everybody was just sick of him by this time. All his bullshit, all his threats, everything. The pickup trucks started to roll into the town meeting around 6:30 p.m. They parked up by the cafe, over by the tavern, and by 8 p.m., the whole place was just full of vehicles. It was pretty noticeable by now. They came up from Graham, came up from Maitland, and Quintman. So they got to talking about Ken's court continuance and all this here. So some of the farmers thought that the whole continuance thing was a good thing. This would keep Ken out of their hair, like for a few more days and whatnot. Some had talked about protecting the witnesses that Ken was after, and there were a few that left here. They decided to move things over to the Legion Hall. Now more folk were just showing up around from surrounding areas, right? So that's why they did that. Now they were going to figure out what was going to go on over the next 10 days. Talk about how to keep people safe and stuff. And there were like 60 town members at this town hall by this time here. Things got a little bit rowdy here because the men were upset and all that. You know, Ken, all his fucking nonsense. They talked about what could be done about Ken's caravan of vehicles. You know, they had weapon arsenals and everything. Another member had spoke up and wanted a solution without guns. But they would have to be careful to abide by the law. Now, Ken's lawyer, he was just way too good, man, and nobody wanted any jail time. Like, they seen what McFadden had did for McElroy, right? Like, he was always getting him out of jams. So, it was decided here that they would first seek some legal counsel. Now, this was from a dude named David Baird. But the lawyer wanted fucking nothing to do with this case. Just in case something happened to Ken, he just wanted no part of it. And there were talks of forming a posse to patrol the streets, but they wanted it to be legal, so they would have to be deputized. So Sheriff Estes had came to the hall here sometime later, and he was going to explain all the legal formalities and everything here, what the town can do to protect themselves. So they thought, how are these four guys going to make it through to the next 10 days, right? Like, how can we stop Ken? The town and the sheriff batted around a couple ideas here. They thought about doing a town watch. Now, they would use walkie-talkies to communicate, like, on the back roads and everything. And when they seen Ken, they would just radio in his location, different things like that. And then all the questions came, like, what if Ken sees the vehicles, threatens us with his shotgun? The sheriff stated to them that anytime someone has drawn a gun and it's pointed at you, you have a total right to blow him away, said the sheriff. So they also asked about, like, being deputized, and it was a long process. And the sheriff didn't really think it was the greatest of ideas, but I mean, he would go to the county commission, as it didn't hurt to ask them, right? And the whole crew also had to figure out how to communicate to one another while they're on the back roads, because Ken would actually listen in on the radio transmission because he had one set up in his truck and everything. So when they would go over the radio waves, they would just say, "Let's go for a beer," if McElroy was around. And then they could fucking let him know where they're at, and they could go figure their shit out, right? So around 9:30, Ken was home. He heard about the town meeting from his sister, and she told him about all the pickups that were lined up in town. So Ken knew about the whole thing like a day prior to this, so he just let it happen. He went in and called McFadden, just as he promised he would. But McFadden wasn't in his office at this time. He had no idea that McElroy called him and that he was going into town. And with that, folks, I think we're going to end this little episode here and pick it back up tomorrow. Well, I thank you very much for tuning in to Twisted Tales, guys. It's just been a long fucking week here at work, so just trying to ride it out. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Take care.
Once.